Beis speaks about Hillel. We said Hillel and Shammai was Zugais, that was students of Shammai and Naftalion. And I mentioned that Hillel, he came from royalty, but he was very, very poor. And he was considered a tremendous honest. He didn't have there was nothing that would bother him. There was a famous story in the Gemara where somebody had a bet with his friend that he could upset Hillel. And what he did was he went before Shabbos and he started banging on his door and he says, Hillel, Hillel, I need you. He says, how could I help you? He says, I have a very important question to ask you. He says, so what is your question? So he says, the question is, why are the eyes of the people who the people who take care of sheep in the mountains, why it's a certain name of those people, why are they rounded and small? So he says, that's a very good question. He says the reason is because they live in the mountains and it's windy and sand blows into their eyes. So they, as they stay out in the mountain, they keep squinting. So eventually the children are born with those kind of eyes. Okay. Half an hour later, he's still getting ready for Shabbos, banging on the door. He says, hello, with a chutzpah. Why do the Africans have big feet? He says, very good question. He says, in Africa, they have wetlands. They live in wetlands, and they walk around barefoot. So their feet are very wide. Then he says, it comes back another half an hour later. He was like badgering him and bangs on the door. And he says, how come the people in Bavel have round heads? He says, because the doula are not the professional over there. And because of that, they don't know how to extract the baby, and somehow it deforms the head and it becomes rounded. She says, are you the Hillel, the great Hillel that people talk about? He says, yes. Oh, she didn't say, in a Bachman says, yeah, but I'm Hillel. So he says, there shouldn't be any more Hillels like you. So he says, why is that? Because you just made me lose 400 zuz, which was a lot of money in a bet. He says, no matter what, there's no reason for anybody should be angry and always should have patience. That was Hillel. So Hillel, as being, we said, very poor, he was promoted to Nasi, which was exceptionally, this is the highest form of covet a person can get. And he realized that his own personality somehow changed a little bit when he became a Nasi. And he says like this in the Mishnah. So he wanted to teach people not to pursue becoming famous. He says, Hu ha'ya'omer. Again, Hu ha'ya'omer, we said before, means he tended to live that way. And he used to occasionally continuously say this when he met people. He says, it's just not worth being in the position I'm in. Hu ha'ya'omer. He generally would say, he was accustomed to saying this. Negit Shema Avat Shemei. This is actually Aramaic, which was a language they taught in Bavel. He came from Bavel to go to Eretz Yisrael to learn with Shema and Naftalion. So he writes this in Aramaic. He says, anybody that looks for greatness, he wants to become famous, is Avat Shemei. He's going to lose his reputation. He's not going to have that same, he thinks by being famous, he is going to, it's such a great attribute, but he says at the end of the day, you're going to lose your fame, your reputation. And I'll just finish the Mishneh. It's your Mishneh, it's a small Mishneh, and I'll come back to it. With the law Moisef, a person who doesn't add to his own qualities. In other words, we can't say, stay in a certain level and be there, even though if you're in a good level. You always have to constantly aspire to get to a higher level. Because if you don't, you're never going to remain even the way you were. You're gonna lose what you even have. So you have to constantly work on yourself to better yourself. So the law Moisef, if somebody does not seek to increase his value, so to speak, is Yosef. He's going to decrease it. With the law Yalov, and a person who doesn't study, and here we're talking about Torah, and he refuses to increase his limit, his amount of Torah. He just stops. Or somebody who never studied, could also be in both ways, is Ketela Chayev. And we'll get into that a little bit also. He deserves that. The Shtamish B'Toga is Chalif. Toga is a crown. Anybody that uses the crown, meaning Torah, is Chalaf, he's going to fade away. Chalaf is like the wind blows you away. In other words, somebody who uses the Torah for a way to increase, whether it's fame, whether it's money, or whatever it will be, is Chalaf. Eventually, it's because it was done Shalei Lishma, you're going to have that knowledge, but you're not going to want to increase it also. It follows what we're talking about. Then everything is going to just fade away and just blow away in the wind. So let's get back a minute over here to what we're saying in the beginning of this Mishnah. Hu haya omer. Again, negit shema abat shema. Let's think about this. Who is the one who appoint? When I was growing up, the most famous names that we had when we were growing up, I mean, anybody in Jewishness is Moshe, Aaron, and Yaakov, the most famous names around. So there's millions of Moshes, millions of Aarons, millions of Yaakovs. When I grew up and somebody said Rabbi, we knew he didn't have to go any further. We're talking about Rabbi Kotler. He was the preeminent person that came after the war, and he started, Sab Lakewood, of course, we know that, but he started also the concept of a kollel in America. Up to that point, there was no kollel in America. There were maybe here and there, but not in such a mass. The thought process was there to build in a different neighborhood. At that time, Lakewood was a desert. There was a few Yidden there that lived there that were davened there was no yeshivas there. There was basically, Rabban started a movement. Reb Moshe was the eminent Tosik of the generation when he was alive. Chassidim, Litvaks, although he did have some issues with some of the Chassidim when he did certain psak that they didn't agree with because they were a little more machmer, like Cholov Stam, things like that. But everybody, even the Satmar Rebbe, who's had his few issues with Reb Moshe, he so respected him. He used to send people to him for a shayla because. And one time he sent them person for a shayla. And by the way, the Satmar Rebbe was a genius in Torah. He knew every little side issue, little in halacha. But so one time he sent somebody to Reb Moshe, and Reb Moshe said, "Tell the Satmar Rebbe he shouldn't be because it was a question of making a bracha if he was allowed to make it. I won't get into that story." And he said, "Don't tell the Satmar Rebbe not to be afraid to pass him, because he knows his stuff." But he sent him to Reb Moshe. We said Reb Moshe. We didn't need more. Who appointed him? Who made him the Posek Hadar? Nobody. Who made the Yaakov Kamenetsky the person that was known for emes and anivus and he was just a man that you wanted to, you could approach. He was very approachable, like all of them, and he was just an unbelievable person with a personality that everybody felt was godless over there, even though he was in the shadows of a Moshe. He was in the shadows of a Yaakov, of a Baron. But he was a giant in his own right. Nobody appointed them. It was done through what Hillel says over here. It's one Mishnah. If you're searching to become famous, it's not happening because nobody looks for people. There's a saying: when if you pursue famous, then being famous, then it runs away from you. So they used to run away from covet. There was a story with Reb Moshe that they used to come, I'm sorry, with the Chavetz Chaim, they used to travel by train, sometimes a few Gedolim together, and all the people, these town people used to come meet the train. So in the beginning, Chavetz Chaim didn't want to go out of the train. He used to hide like in the back because he didn't want the covet of everybody used to So one of the Gedolim that was with him, he says, listen, people are coming here, A, for covet Torah, and B, when they see you, they feel good. Don't you want to mechaya yid? Don't you want to make a Jew feel good? Same thing with Reb Moshe. If you notice in all his pictures, he's posing. Because one time in camp, they came over to him, and he was in the mountains, And initially he didn't like it. The Rabbanim don't like to have it. And somebody said, he says, but this child who taking this picture is going to revere this picture and is going to know what a regard of his generation. So he used to, after that, at that point, he used to straighten out his clothing before he took a picture. He says, hold on a second. And he straightened himself out because it was not done for himself. It was done for the future. It was done for Torah. It was done for Kedusha. Nobody appointed them. These people were somehow, they grew into that role because people wanted them to be in that role. Now, there's a famous story that Reb Moshe was in a hospital in his later stages in the 80s. And in the same time, on the same floor, there was, from the Hearst newspaper, this William Randolph Hearst began this major Hearst communications. He had all these, I think it's still around. And his son, William Randolph Jr., was in the hospital at that point, and he was also an elderly man. And he was a very cantankerous, old, grudgy. People didn't like him because he was very entitled. He was in a hospital and he used to boss everybody around. He was used to getting his way. Meanwhile, in Reb Moshe, the hospital was getting hundreds and hundreds of letters writing to him before Shalemus and everything. The hospital almost couldn't even handle it. And they kept bringing letters to him, and his room was like full of letters. And the nurses used to go in, and he used to constantly was very respectful for the nurses. He used to tell them to calm down when they would take his blood, because it's hard for an older person to take the blood. So he was making everybody feel good. So the nurses then, who weren't Jewish, realized they were in the presence of greatness. So meanwhile, one day, Hearst turns around and says, "Where are all the nurses? What's going on? I need something. How come nobody's here?" So a nurse comes in and she says, "Well, we're sorry, but everybody happens to be right now with the rabbi." He says, "What are you talking about, rabbi?" So he says, "Oh, there's a great rabbi here." He says, "Great rabbi. What's his name?" He says, "Feinstein." He says, "Feinstein, I never heard of the man." He says, "Why? What makes him so great?" So the nurse started to describe some of his things, about that she saw. So he says, "Listen to me." He says, "If I didn't hear of him, he's a nobody." He says, "You know what? Tell him to come here now." He says, I'll interview him. And I'll give him a center spread in my newspaper. I'll make him famous." So the nurse starts giggling. And he says, "He's not that kind of a guy. He's not looking for fame." It was like, and the man didn't even understand that concept. A guy, when he has money, he's looking for fame. He's looking for something. But Moshe was not looking for anything. In this week's parsha, it's talking about Bamidbar. We start a new sefer. It says, the pasuk says, "Su'u es roish kol hadas b'nei Yisrael l'mishpachoisem l'beis avoisem." Interesting wording. The point is to count the people of Klal Yisrael. So first it says, "Su'u es roish kol hadas b'nei Yisrael," the heads of all of Das Yisrael. In other words, the count heads. And then it says, "L'mishpachoisem l'beis avoisem," meaning the family and history. And then it says, "B'mispar shemois," with the count of the names. What is he saying over here? There's too many words here. Why don't you just say count Klal Yisrael? What's all this wording over here? So the pshat could be, you have people who walk into a room, they walk into a rebbe, it happens many times, and he says, "Shalom Aleichem," and he says, "What's your name?" He says, "My name," he says, "I'll tell you the truth." He says, "My Zayda was Reb so-and-so, the Rebbe of so-and-so. My elder Zayda is an enical from the sons, an enical from the Chayze." And he goes to the, he said, "Yeah, but what's your name?" She says, "My name is so-and-so." He says, "Yeah, but who are you?" He says, "Well, I just told you." He says, "That's not what's important," he says. "You're telling me you're telling me about your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. You're telling me about your yichus." He says, "B'mispar shemois, I want to hear about your name. So es roish kol hadas b'nei Yisrael. What's going on in your head? What is your qualities in life?" And that's what we have to look for. And that's how we become famous, so to speak, even though we don't look for fame. Because the law Mosif, if you don't add, you're going to lose. So somebody who wants to be famous in the sense, not because he wants to be famous, but he actually becomes for a reason, it's because he's constantly studying and he's constantly learning. And I think I once mentioned that Rabbi Yaakov used to learn the Masechta Shabbos which is the largest Masechta, every Shabbos. It takes, we're learning Shabbos and Daf Yomi. So far, we're holding Ayin Dalet, Ayin Hey, and the 75, and it took us 75 days. And believe me, we didn't learn it anywhere near as clear as the Moshe used to learn it. He said he learned Shulchan Aruch over 400 times. You can't become a posek of that magnitude without learning in such a great amount of knowledge to retain it without studying it so many times and so many times. Today happens to be the Yortzeit of Ramchal. So Ramchal he lived about 600 years ago, and he wrote so many sfarim. He passed away when he was only 39 years old. People don't realize it. He accomplished, by 20 he was already writing. At those days he lived in Sephardi countries. They used to write poetry on about the Rebbeinu Shalom. That was amazing. When he was 20, little controversial at that point because it was 100 years after Shapsut Tzvi, the fake Mashiach. And at that point, people were very wary of people that used to write about the Rebbeinu Shalom in flowery ways because they felt. Also, he said, interestingly, the Ramchal said that his Rebbe was a malach. He said that he used to meet what he used to call him the Maggid in his farm, but people who knew him knew he meant it in a deeper sense. Anybody in Kabbalah in those days, and the people who was very strong in Kabbalah, it was something that was not unusual. But people didn't usually speak about it or anything. But apparently, for some reason, he did tell somebody. So at the end, what happened was that it took a while for them to understand his godless. But he wrote the Sil Sisharim. The Sil Sisharim, this is a quote. And now if I told it to you, not saying that the Ramchal wrote and Sil Sisharim wrote it, he wrote that a person it comes to this earth for a number of years, whatever it should be, 120 or 120. He should enjoy life. He should appreciate everything that Rebbeinu Shalom gave him. So he actually, in fact, in today's Gemara, it talks about that a person who doesn't study astronomy, although we don't really down into it as much, doesn't understand, is in a way not giving enough credit to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because if you look at astronomy, the greatness of what goes on up there, you realize how much the Rebbeinu Shalom created and how small we are and how little we know and how little we are. And the Orchos Tzadikim says that the biggest avera, that biggest thing that causes people to sin is being a Baal Gaiva. If I think that the other person, who is he to tell me, or what does this guy think he is, or who is she, or whatever it is, then that creates sin. So says the Ramchal in the Sil Sisharim, you should enjoy life to its fullest, because then you will appreciate what the Rebbeinu Shalom gives you. Now, enjoying life to its fullest could mean many things. And at first glance, you would think it means having all these vacations. No, when you go on a vacation and you go to the ocean and you see the expanse and the beauty of the ocean, then you're enjoying Godless Havara. So you have to always fit in. When there was a Rebbe that was wanting to eat an apple, and Chassid was watching him, and he saw the Chassid made some sort of had a cloudy face. All of a sudden, so the Rebbe said, I have a feeling I know what you're thinking. He says, what is that? He says, you're thinking that I make a bracha on an apple, I eat the apple, and you make a bracha on an apple, and eat an apple, so we're both human beings, we're both the same. He says, the difference is, he says, when I make a bracha on the apple, he says, I look for an apple that's nice, so that I should make a bracha on the apple, not because I want to eat the apple. I want to show the godless Havara with this apple. You're hungry, you'll see a nice apple, you want to eat the apple, but you can't eat an apple. You're not allowed to eat an apple without making a bracha, because it's a form of gezela for the Rebbeinu Shalom. You have to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom. So therefore, you have to eat the apple in order to make the bracha. I make the bracha in order to, rather you eat that, you make the bracha because you have to eat the apple. You want to eat the apple. I don't really need the apple. He said, I want to be Magadol the Shmoy of Rebbeinu Shalom. So I want to say a bracha for the Kedusha to Rebbeinu Shalom for creating such a beautiful item. In fact, there was this woman, I don't remember her name. She wrote a book. She was in South Africa, and she was in a wheelchair. She was very, very ill. I don't remember what her name was. And she made a very famous quote. It's an unbelievable quote. So she quoted something like, when you look at an apple and it has seeds in it, you can count the seeds in the apple. You can count 10 seeds, 12 seeds, 15 seeds. But from one seed, you don't know how many apples can come out. That's the godless sabayr. You take this one seed out of the 12 that you have in the apple and you plant it. You have so many things that come out of there, such beauty that comes out of there. And this is part of what he's saying over here. You have to, that's what Ramchal's shit is, of course. And in that case, you learn from the godless sabayr how small we are and how much we should accomplish. And you want to be a big shot, you're going to call yourself famous. Who are you compared to in the realm of the universe? Now, there was a very famous story. I don't know if you heard it, maybe you did. You didn't. There was this was somebody's one of the mashgichim in Lakewood found this story in Vienna. In the early 1900s, there was a girl that learned in the Beis Yaakov there from girl, and she had an unbelievable voice in all the plays and in all everything. She was the center for the soloist. She had a voice of a bird. And one day, and she became famous in all the plays there. They in Vienna, all the women. I mean, but of course it was separate, only for women. She would do it. And one day, somebody heard about it and let known outside the Jewish world that there's this unbelievable singer. So one day, when she comes out of school, there was a man waiting for her, and he asks her if she's the person with the wonderful voice. And she says, "Yes. How could I help you?" She says, "I'm an agent. I could make you famous." I don't know if I said the story or not, because I said whatever. Anyway, so he says, she says, "Well, what do you mean?" So, "I could make you famous. You'll be able to sing in front of kings and queens and all over the world." So she says, "Okay, let me think about it." She said, she's thinking to herself, it doesn't really pass. But, in the back of her mind, she wanted to become famous. Everybody is a little bit, little Yetzirah there. It starts with a little bit. So she goes home and she tells her parents, and her parents are chalishing over something in the outside world, bringing outside influences into her. It's gonna ruin her. She's a wonderful girl. Sure enough, she does. She says, "Let me think about it for 3 weeks," and she decides she's gonna do it. And she gave herself this whatever happened, like good excuses, all for the Rabbi Shalom, the God of Sabayr. In any case, 3 weeks later, he comes back. The father says, "Listen, before you make your final decision, let's go to the Rebbe, and we'll speak." It goes to the Rebbe of the town. This was in Vienna, and the Rav, and he tries to convince her. He sees he can't convince her. So he tells her, "You know what?" He says, "Let me take you to the Kapishnitzar Rebbe. He happens to be in town now." And Kapishnitzar Rebbe was a person that was able to see a big picture and was able to, he was a very bright man. And then she goes to the Kapishnitzar Rebbe with the father. She was a good girl, innocent girl, but she also wanted this Yetzirah was giving her and the Kapishnitzar Rebbe asks, "So what is it you're looking for?" She says, "I'm looking for, listen, to sing in front of kings, and I'm a from Jewish girl." And he says, "You realize you're going to be out of here, you're not going to get kashrus and Shabbos, you're going to have to perform." She says, No. I'm very strong. I'm a Beis Yaakov girl, and Barbara Streisand went to Beis Yaakov also. And at the end, don't worry about it. She says, No, I do worry about it. Once you're out of this circle, you're going to see you're going to change. So he saw that things were not going so well. So he looks at her and he says, "Listen to me." He says, "What if I promise you that if you don't do this, that you will have a son that will be world famous in Torah? What if I promise you this?" So she looks at him and says, you can promise me this?" So he says, "Yes." She says, "Okay, I accept. If you promise me I will have such a son." And sure enough, that's the way the story ends. Now this was in early 1900s. So the Mashgiach of Lakewood, who saw this story written up in the annals of they used to records. They used to have unbelievable records in Europe of everything that went on in the Kehillah, and this story is written in there. And he wanted to find out who this was, because the woman's name was Shif. And she looked around. He looked around, tried to watch, and finally he realized that who she married, and she had a son. Who was this son at the end? This son passed away at the age of 102. He passed away 5 years ago, and he was the greatest posek in the world. His name was Reb Shmuel Vosna in Eretz Yisrael. And this Reb Shmuel Vosna was so smart, such a genius, that anytime he wrote 10 Sfarim on shilas that people sent him. People sent him shilas from all over the world, and he wrote 10 Sfarim answering these shilas. That's how great a Paisik he was. And it was on Shevet Halevi, it's called. It's just so clear and concise when he asks the Shala how he answers these shilas. This was all because of his mother giving up and doing what was what the Yiddish mama wants, because that's what the mother wants more than anything else. Sinach from their children. Now this mashgiach, I think it was Rav Siegel, went to Rav Shmuel Vosner, and he wanted to confirm the story. So he went and he told him. Now Rav Shmuel Vosner at that time was in his 90s, and he went over to him and he said, I read this story. I don't know if it's. I want to. I want to make sure. I want to hear if it's from your own mouth that this is true. Shmuel Vosner never heard the story. He says the names all fit. My mother's maiden name was Schiff, married Rabbi Vosner, and I'm a product of that union. He says, but this one thing I do remember. He says, every day on the way out to yeshiva, my mother used to give me a kiss on my forehead, and she used to say, please, Tatala, learn and learn and learn, because you have no idea what I gave up so that you should go. I should have you, and that you should learn. And this is what Mesiras Nefesh does, but also what learning does, and how you become famous as a Jewish person. I see it's late. I didn't even finish the Mishnah, but it's very crucial to understand how you didn't become real famous the proper way. So I'll stop right here. I think the time is already there. So we should all be zoicha to have Miyat Hashem zivugim and children that the Mesiras Nefesh of a mother should bring them, the calibers that we would love to see in all our children. Have a good